Hey, welcome back to Love, Growth, and Narratives. This is our third episode. I'm Tiffany.
And I'm Freddie.
And I want to thank all of you out there for joining us each week. And we see you watching and listening and subscribing to our channel. We really appreciate that. I just want to go back to the last episode for one moment because we had a question that we didn't get a chance to answer. Someone asked us what our love languages were. Very important. My love language is acts of service and quality time. And I didn't know that those were my love languages until, like I said in the last episode, a previous relationship mentioned to me about love languages. But when I took the test, it resonated with me so much that that's exactly what I need. I need someone who does little things for me without me asking, and I need a lot of quality time. How about you, Frederick?
Yeah, when we talked about this earlier, I realized that, I wanted to go in and re-inventory my thought process there. And it seems like it hasn't changed, that it is quality time, because I love quality time, and physical touch, and it's crazy because I know some people love gifts and everything. I don't mind gifts, but it's not the same for me.
Yeah.
I like that physical touch. I like to be able to hug, be able to cuddle, all those different types of things. And you let me do that a lot. So I appreciate that.
That actually leads me and us into the direction that we're going today in this episode, where we're talking about growth. So with the love language of your love language being physical touch, that's an area that I need to grow in because I do not naturally touch a lot. And so that's an area that I have been forced to grow in. And it's a good thing with you. And I appreciate you giving me the space for that growth, because growth takes time.
But that wasn't always one of my love languages. Physical touch was not. I mean, if you had come to me 20 years ago, that would have been pretty far down on the list. Mm-hmm. But it just seems like as I've gotten older, I just enjoy that physical touch. And so because it has come to me probably over the last maybe 3 or 4 years. So I have time for you to kind of catch up with me.
And that's growth, right?
Yes.
That is growth.
Absolutely.
So speaking of growth, I want us to define what growth means to us. I think it's important to do that because another thing that you taught me, which I had to grow in, is that, a dictionary only defines a word and how it's used in that time frame. I mean, obviously the word growth is not going to change a ton, over the years or the decades or generations, but it really matters how you kind of define it for yourself, especially when you're in a conversation with someone. It's important to talk about how you define those words. And that way, when you have this conversation, you kind of maybe be more in the same space. So
yeah, so if I can, I'm sorry to interrupt, but if I can just speak on that real quick. Mm-hmm. What I've always said, and I get into this argument with my father all the time, dictionaries are not authoritative sources. They're not. The purpose of a dictionary is to document common usage of a word. It doesn't define a word. It just documents the common usage of a word. And as we see with a lot of our words have changed over the past 15, 20 years. And so as we're discussing things, it's critical to know what your definition of that word is so that we're talking about it the same way.
Right. Yep. Exactly. I agree with you. So how would you define growth?
For me, growth would be the ability to improve. I mean, I don't know. I can't go much deeper than that. The ability to prove, the ability to change in a way that improves who you are as a person, improves your relation, improves whatever you feel is lacking.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Like, growth for me is basically just doing something different than I'm used to doing, being outside the box, thinking outside the box. Sometimes growth is letting go of something. Sometimes growth is grasping on to something. It could be a belief. It could be a person. It could be an item.
Yes.
Growth is hard. It's messy. It's slow. It can be fast depending on what it is. There's so many different components to growth. And I think that I've had to grow quite a bit in the last almost 3 years we've been together, but especially in the last year. I've had to grow in many ways in different areas of my life. And For a while, I stayed away from growth because I resisted it or I had a difficult time with it. You're forced to grow. You're going to grow at some point, whether you want to or not. But I think in my childhood, I moved so many times and went to several different schools. I think I went to like 7 different schools before middle school, 7 different elementary schools.
Yeah.
I just wanted things to stay the same. I needed something to be familiar, something I could rely on. I needed to see a pattern. But I know that staying in that one space doesn't help me as a person in a more broader sense. So I think I'm now ready to grow more than I was before, but still resistant and growing in every area of my life. I think there were certain areas I was willing to grow, like, my job and career and, school, education, all that kind of stuff. But certain areas I was not willing to grow. And now I am.
It's interesting you say that about having moved around a lot, because I also moved around a lot as a child. There were some times we would move so often that we wouldn't even unpack. And so because of that, there was constant change. But for whatever reason, I don't know if it's because of that or just something within my personality, I love change. I enjoy change, which is sometimes bad because sometimes something I could be doing might be right. And I love change. And so it's interesting how people can have a similar challenge in childhood, but then grow out of it 2 totally different ways. But one of the other things I wanted to talk about when it comes to growth is, yes, and it is difficult, but people get to a certain point in their lives or their careers where they feel like, okay, I'm done growing. And I just don't understand that. I don't understand how, if you're still alive, you're not still trying to figure out a way to become better. It's like, well, then what's the point? I just don't get it. I'm sorry.
I agree with you. I think though sometimes in certain areas you're like, I'm going to stop here. I'm not going to keep giving myself more challenges and new things because there's another area that I need to focus on. It's really hard to grow in everything at the same time.
Yes, it is.
It's a challenge. And sometimes people have to put things in a box and say, okay, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing in this box because I'm going to try to grow over here in this other box. And we just have to give people grace. And
that's still growth. And I'm not saying this like I'm this great change agent that I just make these wonderful, huge leaps as a person, because I don't. I have the same difficulties as everyone else. I think one of the differences is, and a lot of it is because I'm just an extremely curious person. Mm-hmm. And because I'm so curious about things, I learn things that they require me to think about my own thought processes, my own values, my own opinions and ideas. And so just in that, being curious kind of forces me, even though there are things that I know I need to do that I'm not excited about doing because I know it's going to be hard. But it's like, what are we here for?
Right. I think it's important to try not to. I mean, you want to help people grow. If you see somebody stagnant, you want to give support or give advice. But it's also important to note that we may not understand how much they're growing. Like growth for them may have been like showering that day, right?
Yes.
So growth is different for different people at different stages in their life. And I understand that more than I think I ever did after everything that has happened in the last, we need to say year, really the last 6 months. That growth can be very tiny.
Yes.
It can be tedious. Something you have to work on some of it you have to work on every day, and some of it life throws itself at you and you have to grow. You have no choice.
Yeah.
But it's different for different people. But at the end, it is about hopefully becoming a better person at the end of the day.
And I tell you, just as an example, and this is one of the things that I've just never forgotten, was I always felt like I needed to be the smart person in the room. And I was in telecom for about 20 years, and a good bit of that was spent on the fiber optic side of communications. And I just loved it. But I wanted to grow into management. And I told my boss, I said, I want to figure out how I can get into management. And he actually promoted me quicker than I realized. So it kind of threw me. And in being a manager, as opposed to being a technology person, we were the tier 3 for a worldwide telecommunications company, which means that when no one else could fix it, we had to be able to fix it. And I loved that life. So when I got into management, and now I'm looking at people's schedules and vacations and doing evaluations and bringing in contractors and all this kind of stuff, it was so new to me because it's something I'd never done. Mm-hmm. And what I ended up doing was I started falling back into my old ways, and I would find ways to work trouble tickets that really I shouldn't have. I should have passed them on to someone else, but I would tell myself, oh, I'm just going to do this real quick. Just so I can keep my skills sharp, I want to do this real quick. And I was a poor manager. And I didn't realize it until I had switched jobs and kind of looked backward that, wow, I was a horrible manager because I wasn't able to, I didn't force myself out of my comfort zone into growth so that I could become a good manager. And so I really messed that one up. And so when I got into the government and got back into positions of leadership, I forced myself away from a lot of the stuff that I enjoyed, that was my comfort zone, which is the technology, and forced myself into managing people and taking my time to take care of my staff and making sure they have everything they need and that they were taken care of. But that was a tough one for me. What about you?
When I first started into the workforce in a career, I was in the fashion industry, and I felt I had to work extremely hard to prove myself as someone who was young, who at the time was not yet college educated, who was Black. And I just worked myself to death in that field. And that continued on when I moved into teaching. I thought that's what I needed to do. And some parts of me still feels that that's what I needed to do. But now at this point in my life, I'm realizing I don't have the energy or the desire to put as much time as I did before. Even though I feel it's really important, this is really going against basically my morals, to be honest with you. But I just can't do it. I just can't. I'm older. I'm going into menopause. I have this family. The family has some medical issues that are needing, multiple people. There's a child involved. There's just so much going on, my own health, that I cannot put the kind of work into my job that I used to before. And for that, it takes growth because I feel guilty. I don't feel like I'm as good as a teacher. I'm not sure I connected as much this year with my students, which is mostly probably because I was gone for 3 months, but I had to grow and let myself feel uncomfortable in not doing what I've always done in terms of my job, just putting that 1,000%, proving that I'm just as good as anybody else, trying to tear down stereotypes and all that. Feeling like my motto for a long time was like, you have to change the world. I used to write that all the time. I used to write Tiffany the Great changes the world. I used to write that over and over and over when I was younger. And I had it in my mind, that is my job, to change the world. And I'm going to do it through teaching. But I think that I also lost myself doing that. And that took a lot of growth. I think the first time that I decided to make a change and grow at work was when it was after I had lost a lot of weight, and I was I was really in the fitness world. I had this huge following. I mean, huge for me. It wasn't million followers, but it was up there. And I thought I was going to leave, education. I was going to go be this trainer, but then I developed these health problems, and I knew I still needed my insurance. So I was like, how am I going to get my mind back from Miss Fitness back to being a teacher? I have to do this for the long haul. And I told myself, well, I'm going to incorporate social justice in everything that I do. That was growth for me. And I went away from some of the other things that I was pushing in class to focus on that. And that actually really helped me grow. It helped me grow as a person. It helped me actually learn more because I had to know what I was talking about. I had to get more history. It was a lot of growth in that moment. And now fast forward to where I am today. I don't have the time to spend to do all of that research and all of that work and buy all of those books and all the things that I do. So once again, I'm finding myself having to grow. Like, how can I still be a good, effective teacher and have my family in balance? I know you don't like that word, but balance, like what's going on outside of work. It's hard. Yeah. It's challenging.
Absolutely.
I feel guilty. I feel like something's missing. But I'm going to have to sit in that because, as my therapist says, which going to therapists, I've been doing that off and on for years, but I think this is one of the best therapists I've been with lately. He's really like, just because you're uncomfortable or you feel guilty doesn't mean it's wrong.
That's right.
And that takes growth right there, because I'm used to reacting to how I feel. I'm a Pisces, and I'm used to and a woman, I'm used to reacting to how I feel. So that's a big challenge for me to sit in that uncomfortable feeling.
Yes.
That takes a ton of growth.
Yeah.
It takes a ton of growth to hear or see people at work, and this is in all my jobs over the years, do and say things that I think are so inappropriate and so hurtful. And it's not that I want to be a bystander, but I can't fight every single battle, because that's the tag that gets put on me, is the battle fighter. And so I've had to sit in that growth as well, like just brush it off, let it go, move on, and pick and choose when to really stand up.
Yeah.
And that's been a big area of growth for me, to get more organized, to do the things that are important, to do the things that are going to make the biggest impact. So that's a lot of growth there, because I can't do all the things that I've wanted to do. Historically, when I teach, I had to balance that growth with coming home, because our work schedules are so different, right? So Frederick, you're me going back and forth calling him that. His work schedule starts very early because his company is back east. And so he's, done fairly early. By the time I get off of work, which teachers can leave around 3-ish, depending on the day, my personal day is just starting, where Freddie he's worked, he's had, also connections with friends. He's been able to work out, he's been able to do everything. And so when I get off, when a teacher gets off, that's when we start doing more work, like the work we couldn't do with the kids were there. And that the first year, I feel like Freddie embraced that, but afterwards he's like, I think you need to cut it off. And that was hard for me to do. But I knew it was also important, because I could go all night. I know how I am. I used to stay at work at 10 o'clock at night sometimes. So that was a huge area of growth for me, where I have to give up something that I felt was so important, at least in part, and then start doing something else with my day and try to match. And Freddie also had to grow in that I can't just cut it off right when I come home, because this is when my day starts, where I can correct papers or I can answer parents. So you had to give me a little bit of that leeway. We don't have the same kind of schedule. So we both had to really grow in that area.
It's interesting that you talk about the decisions that you've had to make, in terms of being a teacher. But one of the drivers of a lot of that decision-making was the fact that you took on a teenager, my son, who's now 15. How did that go?
Well, it's still going. That's an area of ongoing growth. While I had always thought I was going to have kids, and that I knew what I was going to do and how I was going to raise them, and things I would say and not say, and how they would be and not be, actually being involved in it was a whole nother ball game. But also, to my credit, I am a step parent at the teenage years, right? So when I met Joseph, he was 13, I think.
Yeah.
And he'll be 16 soon. So there was a lot that was already there from the beginning, that some of it I was trying to grow, and some of it I was trying to undo. But I still had to find, my growth in all of that, because now that I'm a step parent, I could not put all the time into my students and my career the way that I was before, because my time was needed in other areas. And that was an area of growth, like, which one do I do? And it is a really hard decision to make, because I had been doing it, teaching a certain way for so many years. I was used to it. And like I had made teaching my identity. But I think I've been handling it. I've been trying to grow in that area and grow as a person, as a stepmom, as even a teacher, because now I'm on the other side and I get to hear and see things from the parental side of things. And so I try to take it easy on the teacher and take it easy on myself now that I know, You
definitely talk about parenthood differently, because when you first kind of came into the picture, you had a kind of an oversimplified way. Well, all you got to do is this. And I said, okay, well, let's see how that works out.
Yeah.
And you realize that, as a parent, once that child gets into their teen years, there are limits as to what you can change with them, unless they want to, because they're going to listen more to their friends than they're going to listen to you. And so trying to figure out ways to get through, but you can't just yell and scream, which is something that you helped me with in terms of calming myself down and being more empathetic and talking to him more about these things, talking through these things. So that has been big. But for me as a parent, because of the fact that changes in a child normally happen so gradually, a lot of times, because you're there every day, you don't a lot of times see it. And so by the time someone else sees what's going on, you're looking at this snapshot in time of this huge problem with the child, but you didn't see what led up to it. And so for me, I had to grow, because what it forced me to do was to take a step back from the ways I was parenting and start to get rid of parts of my parenting that didn't work and take on some other things that I hadn't tried before. So that was really tough for me, but I needed it.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to be fair to myself here and say, while all of my, ideas and plans didn't fall through, I don't get to execute them all the way that I want to either, because we have different parenting styles and I am the step parent, and I'm also trying to be careful not to, while I'm the one who's mostly physically in the picture, his mom is still there, and I don't want to step over those boundaries. I want him to be comfortable. I know what it felt like to me to have somebody come into the house and take over my parent and try to take me over too. And so I wanted to be cognizant of not making him feel that way. So that's a very careful dance, a very careful area of growth for me, because I'm used to just like, this is how I want it and this is how it's going to go. I don't think that I'm selfish. It's just that being in the house by myself is, I'm used to things being a certain way. So that's been an area of growth for me, taking into account his personality, that I am the step parent, his age, and that, when you have a kid or even several people in the home is going to look different. And that was a huge area for growth for me in a very short period of time.
But I tell you what really impressed me about you, because, for those who don't know, we started living together a little almost a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really nervous about that, because I'm thinking, okay, only child, been living by herself all of these years. What kind of problems are we going to run into with that? Because when you're a parent and you're used to seeing change in the refrigerator, you're used to seeing a lot of where you put all this food in the refrigerator, mm-hmm. and then you come back from work and it's all gone, or things are not where they are expected to be. And so the fact that you've taken that in stride, to me, is absolutely amazing.
Thank you. It's not always easy. It's challenging as a person who's used to I'm also an introvert, so I'm used to, being alone and quiet, and I need that actually to recharge and to have, this like kind of constant stimulation going on. Also with a dog in the house who also
needs your attention.
Needs my attention. I'm the support human, and so it's a lot. It's a lot, but it's great. Like the good things outweigh the negative things, which is also a area of growth for me because I'm used to focusing more on the negative stuff. Not that a person shouldn't look at that at all, but that would be heavily where I would work from.
Yeah.
And so that's a big, area of growth for me in terms of trying to show Joseph a different way of looking at life and things and experiencing things and drawing on the way that I grew up and the way I was parented. Plus, I feel like I'm a little bit of a tiger parent where you're a little freer. And so that sometimes we clash in that way. And what I mean by that is we might talk about it and we have we say we're going to do this, but then when it comes to it, it's a little bit different. And I don't want to overstep what you're saying. And Joseph defaults to you naturally and understandably. That's all things that I have to take into consideration and try not to let it cause me anxiety.
Yeah. Well, I think because of the fact that I have 2 older kids, and I remember the parenting experiences with them. With Joseph, I came to a realization that I couldn't swing at every pitch. Everything he does that I wish he did better, I can't constantly be picking at him for everything. I have to pick my battles.
Right.
And sometimes even the battles I pick, I lose. But I can't go for everything because you're just not going to be able to fix everything with a child. So that was one of the things that one of my periods of growth with my older kids was just realizing that you don't have the power and influence that you think you do. And at a certain level, you have to take on a different way. Now, another way you helped me is because of the fact that he's a boy. Now, so you're talking about a boy and his father, and there are primal instincts there because the boy at some point starts looking at his dad like, I think I could take him. And so sometimes when he and I argue, we kind of go at it in a way that it's like I need to correct him and let him know that he's not at that level yet. But in doing so, I'm probably not helping the situation. And so you stepped in. Well, you don't really step in. What you do is you come to me later and say, well, that wasn't the best way to do that.
There's been a couple times where I had to step in. I'm like,
But you normally let it play out, and you'll come to me later and say, that wasn't the best way to do that. And then I end up having to go into his room sometimes and say, all right, Joseph, I got to apologize to you. I kind of went off half-cocked there and, sorry about that and, and kind of work at it that way. But that's a tough one.
And I appreciate you listening to me because I don't know that I've been in relationships before where I was listened to so much, like that I had so much value. Doesn't mean that you're going to do everything that I say, but you really take it into consideration and, you process it and then you act on it, keeping in mind things that I've said. So that also gives me strength because I'm in a relationship where I feel very heard and valued. And I think that that's really important it's important for me. It's important for any relationship, but it also allows me to grow because if I'm not going to be heard, then I'm going to shut down. And If I shut down, then I'm not growing,
One of the reasons why I can listen to you is because you make strong arguments. You make strong, good faith arguments, which is the reason why we have so many discussions. What I used to do years ago, because myself and my ex-wife or a girlfriend or whatever the case may be would disagree, we would quickly do this agree to disagree, which I know everyone has heard of before. I don't do that anymore. And I think it's a really bad idea. And in some circumstances, it's a lazy idea because it's not like I'm going to switch you over immediately over to my train of thought, or you're going to switch me over to your train of thought. But what it is I need to understand why you think differently than I do on this here topic. I have to at least be able to respect your stance. And so I have to dig deep. And so when we find those disagreements, instead of me arguing, I kind of switch into a learning mode. Help me understand why you feel that way. And the value of it is not only do I understand why you feel that way, but there are bits and pieces of that which I may replace with my own bits and pieces. And so where I can say, okay, but she's right in this point. This whole argument, there are these bits and pieces where she made a superior argument, and I'll go and research, and I was like, wow, she was right on that. So now I can take that on, which brings us closer together. It may not bring us to convergence, but at least brings us closer together where we can respect each other's opinions.
I agree. I feel like an area that you've helped me grow in the relationship is nuance. Like, of course, I'd heard of the word before, but the way you used it when we would, in the very beginning, we would get into these heated political arguments. Well, what people call politics, right? Just humanitarian, if you ask me.
Yeah.
But we would get into this heated stuff, and I'm like, how could you say that? And we go back and forth, right? But when you talk about nuance, there's so many pieces to things. It's not just black or white or pro or anti. There's so much in between. And that's why I think it's easier for us to have conversations, because we understand that there's nuance, right? And when you understand that there's nuance, it may change your mind, or it may at the very least help you understand more where the other person is coming from, or understand the information that you're trying to make sense of. You might, and as you said, you might understand bits and pieces that it might just come together. So I don't think before I had grown in that area. I was very like, it's like this and that's it. I feel this way and that's that, And now it's like, I still might feel the way that I feel, but I understand this other piece, and I want to bring that into the fold. And that's an area that I really grew in this relationship, where I can look at things and see like a span of things, if you will. And it just brings so much more understanding.
Yes. And that's what's important, is the understanding, because for me, I don't like being rigid in my ideologies. I have them. I feel like they're well thought out, but I also understand that they're susceptible to the superior argument. And so I love to listen to someone who I feel makes good faith arguments. And what I mean by good faith arguments is that arguments you actually believe, that you've really thought about and you honestly believe. And I want to understand that, because, at the end of the day, you may end up being right. I could be wrong. That's part of life. And for me, because I love to get it right, even if I get it right because I took your opinion, I'm totally okay with that. That doesn't bother my ego at all. What I love is just the whole learning, and people getting stuck in their own mind frame. And I see that in the workplace. I see that in personal relationships, in romantic relationships, where people are a certain way and they just say, I'm done learning. Mm-hmm. I've got everything figured out. Or if I don't have it figured out, oh, well, that's what it is. Mm-hmm. And I don't understand that. I just don't.
It is difficult to understand when people are that way. Sometimes they are growing still in other ways that we can't see, because growth could be just getting out of the bed that morning. But when you're having a discussion with someone and they are not willing to even hear you out,
yes,
or to make sure that they make sense, to make these big blanket statements and not think about other people that they're impacting with what they're saying. They're only just thinking about themselves, or maybe as a small group of people. They need to grow. They need to grow in that area. And I find myself growing so much more than I did in the past. I'm not as resistant to growth as I was. There was a time where I needed things to be the same. I needed consistency because we moved so much and there was just so much change. I went to several different schools in elementary, I think like 6 or 7. And I just needed something familiar. But even within that, there was still growth happening, but I didn't realize it was, and I was resisting it.
Yes.
Where now, Freddie and I, you guys listening out there, we both have therapists. We have our own individual therapists, and then we have a couples therapist. And in my therapy, a big thing that we talk about is being comfortable, or actually being comfortable with being uncomfortable, which is a new thing for me. So it's like, just because you feel guilty or you feel uncomfortable doesn't mean that what you're going through, what you're doing isn't right.
That's right.
And you have to just kind of sit with it. And the more you get comfortable doing that, the easier it is. And so that's where I'm at right now, is really like, oh, I feel bad that I'm not being there for everybody, but that's part of my growth, is to stop being there for everybody and be there for myself a little bit more. And that does feel uncomfortable because it's not what I'm used to, but it's what I need. Like, my body and my lifestyle is telling me you must do this.
Yes.
And I cannot resist that change. So it's really important.
Now that you're becoming comfortable being uncomfortable?
I'm getting more comfortable with it. It's not always easy, especially when it comes to being a teacher, because it's like, those are students, they're kids, you know, and if I recognize I didn't give what I normally give.
Yeah.
I mean, according to the parents, it's like, oh, it's still found, like, you know, we don't know what you normally do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But for myself, I'm like, oh, I know that the year before I went way out, and this year I kind of, that's hard. It is hard, but I have to sit in it because I'm human, and I'm not going to become that person that I was forever. This year I needed to take a back seat, because other things, family was, you know, was more important, was more of a priority. And so I still did my job, but I had to let go of a few things, and I have to be okay with it.
Yeah.
You know, so being okay with being uncomfortable is a huge area of growth.
Yeah.
It really is. And in terms of our relationship, I think just growing in living with someone, having a dog, taking this space, having my mom with us right now, there's just a lot of growth. Sometimes I'm not able to just be in a space by myself because, you know, we live in a small space. So I have to be able to be with myself even when I'm not alone in the room. And that's another area of growth too.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of growth, but it's good. I think it's going to make me a stronger person and a better partner and a better everything, really. Hopefully a better friend as well, be more understanding to my friends and what they're going through and what, you know.
Yeah, and I noticed that the more you take on, or the more you get comfortable making changes in your own life, the easier it is for you to take on these changes. The changes don't become any easier, but your attitude and feeling like this is necessary, I'm going to do it, that I think becomes easier. The decision making becomes easier. I've been like this for some years now because I was a severely depressed person growing up into in my 40s. Where I just said, I can't continue to live like this. I just will not live like this. And that kind of put me on this path to really trying to change and trying to do the hard work. You know, I remember talking to my sister a couple of years ago about this, and she was complimenting me, and she said, it's wild because you normally can't teach an old dog new tricks. And I said, well, I think it's the opposite. I can learn more now that I'm in my 50s than I could in my 20s, because in my 20s, my ego got in the way. My 20s, I thought I knew I thought I knew what I was doing. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was pretty poor results, but I really thought I had a handle on things, and absolutely did not. I'm at an age where now my ego really drives me to change as opposed to staying the same, because I want to be better. But I have to say that doesn't make changing easier. There are still changes that I've been working on for years, I am definitely a more positive person over the last 15 years than I used to be. I mean, it's not even close. But one of the areas that I still struggle in, and I've known this for a long time, I just haven't really nailed it, is the negative self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
And I read this book some years ago by Trevor Mawad, who unfortunately died a couple of years ago, but he talked about neutral thought as opposed to positive and negative, because even though saying positive things to yourself all the time doesn't work all the time, but negative thoughts work every single time.
Mm-hmm.
And I have yet to be able to really kick that out of my psyche, where I'm not beating myself up, calling myself names, luckily to myself where no one else can hear it. But, it's tough. What about you?
I did have a lot of negative self-talk growing up. It came from, peers, society, not really from my mom, like she tried her best to help me have a positive self-image, but I didn't have one for a long time, probably up into my 40s as well, until I went through this huge weight loss transformation where I lost 128 or whatever it was pounds, and I gained this huge following and whatnot on social media. But that weight loss came from beating myself up, not from loving myself.
Yeah.
And while I put back a good amount of the weight, I don't hate myself like I did before. I don't look at myself and dislike myself the way I did before. Yeah, I can see that I still need to lose weight and be healthy, but I'm not like picking myself apart and wishing I looked like this person and that person. I think I do that in other ways, but I don't anymore. I'm kind of hard on myself about like what I could have been as a teacher, or maybe, as a partner, but not really, my character or the way that I look. And that's so refreshing. And it's so odd to me that I do that after I put weight back on. But that was a huge area of growth for me, because when I was working out and losing weight, it was all about how I looked and nothing else. Yeah, I wanted to be healthy, boo, boo, boo. But really it was about how I looked, and I wanted this certain aesthetic and that I was never really going to have without surgery, to be honest with you. And so I don't know, like you said, change is gradual. So gradually I stopped trying to compare myself to other women's bodies and all of that. And one day, it wasn't one day, but it felt like one day, I don't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And it's so refreshing. But I still do beat myself up in other areas, feeling like I could have done more. I could have done more, because that's the role that I've taken on in my life, is that I can do everything.
Yeah.
And now I'm just tired. Menopause is like, nope, no, you can't. So plus I need to just do some self-care too, so that I can even be there for other people. So which is big. I have to force myself to find self-care where it is, and I have to realize it's not something big. It's not a trip to Europe for 2 weeks, or maybe it is for somebody else, but maybe it's just 20 minutes by myself. Maybe it's a nap. Maybe it's, scrolling through social media. I don't know. It could be, self-care can look so many different ways. And that's an area of growth for me too, that everything, it doesn't have to look a certain way. We are taught that life has to be a certain way by a certain age. You have to do this many things. You got to do this. You're a woman. You're da, 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 da. You don't.
Yeah.
You can design your life. And there's certain things you have to do. You're going to be out on the street, but there's not a certain way to show up every day. You can kind of work with that. And that's growth for me, because I'm used to trying to be that. I'm always trying to break the stereotype for a Black person, a Black woman. And instead I almost became one, because it's like we work so hard. Like that's our thing, Black women. And I'm trying to get away from that. That's not my job to be Superwoman, unless I feel like it in the moment. It's not my job though. It's a choice. So
and I think that's an important piece of growth for you, is really doing more for yourself as opposed to everyone else. Everyone that knows Tiffany knows that she does for everyone. And if she has any time left in her day, she might do something for herself, but it rarely turns out that way. And so I think that for you, because we had talked about this before, where you have things that are aspirational and then things that are hardwired.
Yeah.
It seems for you that's still pretty aspirational.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I know for me, in terms of the depression, I was really, really hard on myself, really, really hard on everything. And I remember I read this thing, it was probably about 15 years ago, about neuroscience, that the neurons that fire together, wire together. And I just wondered, I said, what about, if I really put out the time to change something, can I do it in a way where I don't have to work on it anymore? And there have been things in my life that I have put in the work, and it's gotten to the point where I feel like it's hardwired. It's not something I don't have to think about anymore. But that negative self-talk, that might be something that might take me to the rest of my life to fix, but I'm determined to keep working on it.
Well, we're going to have to sit you in front of a mirror and make you say positive things to yourself. You didn't even notice that you had a cutest dimple.
I didn't.
Because you're not looking at yourself.
I don't look at myself.
And you need to.
I don't look at myself.
You need to, and you will.
Yes, I will work on all those things. But I love working on myself. I love being a better person. I don't understand how people think it's a burden to get better. It's like we're getting older. It's like, how do you want to age? Do you want to age in a happy way, or do you want to age being the same person you've always been? I don't understand it.
Yeah. So thank you for tuning in this week on our episode on growth. You've had a chance to hear how Freddie and I have grown individually and together. I hope that makes you go back and think about your own growth, give yourself credit for the areas that you've grown in, and dive into areas that are needing growth. Next week, we're going to be talking about narratives, and that basically is just going to cover, current things that are going on in the world. We'll do our best to talk about, something that we feel is really important and valuable to us all. If you have ideas about things that you want to hear, please put it in the comments. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel, Love, Growth, and Narratives. We appreciate you listening to this episode. And it's Tiffany signing out.
And then Freddie, and thank you so much for tuning in. Do you really value your time? Take care.